Welcome to Focus on Health, a series of educational programs highlighting current health issues sponsored by the Department of Nursing at Salisbury University. I'm Dr. Mary DiBartolo, Professor of Nursing at Salisbury University and host of the program. I welcome back Mr. Art Cooley. You are the co-founder of the Lower Shore Parkinson's Group, and you've been on the show before talking about your experience, unfortunately, with Parkinson's disease, but all the wonderful work you've done in the community as far as establishing this support group. So I know you were anxious to come back to give us an update.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for having me very much. Yes, we would like to, because we've grown, we've changed, and we'd like the folks to know more of what the local Parkinson's group is all about.
Well, I think before we get into all the wonderful activities you have going on and the reorganization that you want to explain a little more about, let's just talk a little bit about Parkinson's disease itself, you know, what the symptoms typically are, and of course your experience. You were diagnosed in 2009.
That's correct.
So give us an overview of Parkinson's and, you know, in part what your experience is like and what generally you see, because you run this group where many people with Parkinson's meet and discuss their experience.
In general, Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disease of the brain where brain cells that produce dopamine die off. And dopamine is required for muscle coordination and muscle movement. So typically a person with Parkinson's will be slow in movement, they'll get stiffer in their features. Since muscles work the tongue, you have trouble speaking sometimes, as you can probably tell from the way I'm talking. But it also has a non-motor side, which is the cognitive side. It affects memory to a degree. It affects what they call the executive characteristics, of multitasking and things like that. So there is no cure for it. There is no drug known or intervention known that will reduce it or slow it down in its progress. It's progressive and it's chronic. And it's the second largest neurodegenerative disease behind Alzheimer's in the world. So there are 1 million Americans that suffer from it. And typically it's a disease where the average age of onset is about 60. But there are young onset people that get it as well.
Yeah, I know. I've learned a lot about Parkinson's myself through a professorship I did, and what I did learn is I think many people in the general public think it's strictly a motor disease. They think of it as tremors, and it's really much more than that because it can affect constipation, as you said, memory, and other systems. You know, there can be lots of problems, including some psychiatric problems with psychosis. I know you wanted to talk about some of the new developments in that area. So I think people don't understand all the different effects Parkinson's has on the body.
Well, when you think, if you've got a chemical that's manufactured in your brain that controls your muscle movement and coordination, it's muscles that move stuff through the digestive system, so obviously it's going to affect constipation. It affects muscles in the eye and the tongue. So there are a lot of things that can be attributed to Parkinson's, and typically by the time you reach the stage where one of the symptoms manifests, like handwriting or trembling in one hand initially, you've lost 60 to 80% of the production capability of your body or your brain for the dopamine you need. So it's a disease that grabs hold of you without your knowledge for some number of years before you're officially diagnosed, typically.
Well, that's similar to Alzheimer's. They're finding more and more that there's a preclinical phase that people aren't even aware of. And with both, I believe, depression and loss of smell can be early, very early symptoms before you have any of the motor symptoms. And I think people see some people with Parkinson's that are having the large motor movement issues, and that's actually a side effect of one of the medications used to treat Parkinson's.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Levodopa is the gold standard drug, and it's mixed with carbidopa to make it palatable. But levodopa, carbidopa, or Sinemet, as it's known, is the primary drug. But you reach a point in taking it where it causes dyskinesia, the shaking in your movements and tremor throughout your body at times. And so there it begins to get more complicated in trying to treat someone, because levodopa also can aggravate the cognitive issues, illusions, hallucinations, psychosis. That's a big area where levodopa is actually causing some of that, and some of the drugs used to treat it attack dopamine. So you've got to find a balance there. And there's one new drug that's just been approved by the FDA, and this summer is the first drug they found that doesn't attack dopamine and can help address people that struggle from illusions or hallucinations, which hits typically 20% of the Parkinson's community will suffer from some level of psychosis throughout their entire life. If they have it over 20 years, that grows to 70% for people with 20 years of Parkinson's since diagnosis.
Well, it seems like you're right about the balance. You need just the right dose to prevent you from going into the freezing, where you can't move and stiff. Yet if you take a little too much to control that from happening, you can get the dyskinesia. So I guess one thing we wanted to emphasize is the importance of seeing a neurologist or a movement disorder specialist that specializes in Parkinson's.
There are several good neurologists in the area, affiliated with Peninsula Regional, affiliated with Atlantic, and so forth. There's not a single movement disorder specialist neurologist with that specialty on the Eastern Shore, which is ridiculous. From Wilmington down to Cape Charles, there are good neurologists, but there's no one with real specific training in movement disorders. So, go see your neurologist by all means, but also, at least for a confirmation of diagnosis and prescriptions, and maybe once a year just to check on how things are progressing, you ought to go to one of the major movement disorder centers like Johns Hopkins or Maryland or Georgetown or University of Pennsylvania, the four closest. And there's a new office in Annapolis now, I think. But nobody yet that's set up on the shore, because there are not a whole lot of these specialists around. So the local neurologists have learned quite a bit about Parkinson's because they have been treating a lot of people. But we encourage everybody in our group, keep that relationship so that you have someone local if something happens to you. If you end up in the hospital from a fall or a car accident, there's someone local that's familiar with you. But always go see the specialist at least annually for an update.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I know you also wanted to talk about, there's two newer formulations of Sinemet, which is the carbidopa-levodopa, and then you mentioned there's a one that's not quite FDA approved yet, but a new way of delivering the medication. So I'll let you talk about that.
Well, the two that are approved are, one is called Duopa, and it's actually the Sinemet put into a gel formulation that's then put into, what the easiest way to refer to it is like a small cassette. And this requires surgery to put a pump directly into your small intestine that you would hook into, like a colostomy would hook into. But this goes into your intestine, not a colostomy, but anyway.
Similar to like an insulin pump beneath the skin, but
you put the cassette on, it's good for 16 hours of steady flow, and it evens out the ups and downs. Typically the oral, which pills that you take, you'll have peaks and valleys and peaks and valleys, and you hit what they call an off period in those valleys where you really lose good functionality. Your typing skills disappear for an hour or two, and then you can get back and maybe type and so forth. So the gel levels that out because it's giving it to you constantly, except for the period when you're asleep, supposedly, and don't need it. The method that, the other method is a reformulation, and it's called Rytary, with R-Y, T-A-R-Y. And it's a combination of immediate release Sinemet and extended release Sinemet, which you can buy both separately now. But now what they've done is they've put it in a capsule with a lot of little bees in the capsule, and they'll dissolve and go to work at different rates throughout the period of time. So if you're taking one tablet of 150 milligrams every 6 hours. That tablet is combined with immediate release and extended release to level out as much as possible the
Does that help at night too?
I don't know at night. Typically, at night I take a longer acting just before going to bed and hope that it lasts through most of the night. But the one that's particularly interesting, and it's in the works, but it's not yet been approved, but it probably will be, hopefully, is an inhaler. One of the biggest problems, or one of the most difficult things to manage with Sinemet is it competes with protein that you eat in your meals for absorption. It has to be absorbed across the blood-brain barrier, brain-blood barrier, and protein competes with it, so you try not to take it within an hour of your meal. The inhaler sends the Sinemet directly through the nasal passages and into the brain. It never competes for absorption with protein, and it doesn't aggravate dyskinesia. So it can help very much in that respect.
That sounds like a big development.
Yeah.
I know with the Duopa, that's the plus of the Duopa. It's down here entering
Right.
the intestine for more smooth absorption versus when you take a pill in the stomach between meals and protein interfering with its absorption. It's
So
unsteady.
you don't get the full effect of the
Right.
medication.
Or erratic effects.
Right,
So.
that's correct.
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing is when these new drugs come out, they're quite expensive, and not everyone can have access to them, but they work wonderfully.
Yeah. Well, there's a new one that has just been released this summer by the FDA. It's called Nuplacid, I believe, and it's the first drug they found to help with the hallucinations and illusions without having an effect on the carbidopa-levodopa or dopamine production. So it's an important drug because a typical antipsychotic drug you would use to treat some of the levels of psychosis also attack dopamine, so you have to balance those two, which is very difficult. This is the first drug that doesn't do that and will help with people struggling with illusions or hallucinations without affecting their dopamine and levodopa intake.
I know one thing we forgot to mention that can be a fairly upsetting syndrome or problem related to Parkinson's is some of the sleep issues and the inner restlessness and vivid dreams and nightmares.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. Akathisia, you heard dyskinesia and all these words ending in SIA, but akathisia is an inner trembling that you get that just people may not see you trembling, but you're trembling all inside. Everything feels like it's jiggling, and it gets very disconcerting. And memory is one of the first things to go to.
Well, I really appreciate you coming in and talking about this. I know it's hard, but to me, it's just so wonderful what you're doing in the community as far as this Lower Shore Parkinson's group. So shall we talk about that,
Sure.
how long that's been around? And I know you're very excited about some of the reorganizing and structuring of it.
Yeah, we are. We're working hard to build this group. We have about 50 families now that are active with us, and we've had quite a few that have come through. We've lost a few, and a few have moved away. And we started one a couple of years ago in Worcester County, and it's trying to build.
Is that a separate group then that meets
Yes,
separately?
we started it and operated it for a while, and then spun it off. But so we're pleased with that. We meet over at the MAC Center once a month on the third Wednesday for an hour and a half at 2 o'clock for a support session, for an education session, and for some fellowship. That's the social aspect is very important.
Mm-hmm.
The opportunity for people to get together and talk with one another about their problems with someone who's going through it. It's been very helpful. So it's a good group, and we've actually received a 501c3 status from the IRS, which we were excited about.
So now you're officially a nonprofit and
We
you
are.
can do
We're
fundraising.
a charity, and we will get into fundraising. We've not been doing a great deal, but we need to. Need to build a stronger budget. We've grown to the point where from the original 4 of us that kind of started this thing back in 2010, we've enlarged the board and got more people in, established clear positions with bylaws, and tried to get better organized, because unfortunately the group that used to be in Salisbury in the late 90s fell apart of sorts when the couple that was kind of leading its meetings moved to Texas, and we don't want to see that happen. If any of the 4 of us move on or are no longer capable of really doing much to help the organization, we want to make sure that we've got folks engaged, and when people are engaged in something, they're more likely to do a good job and be consistent in participating. So we're restructuring a bit, and I think it's going to be beneficial, and we're trying to offer services. We now have 2 exercise classes specifically structured for people with movement disorders. We do Tuesday and Thursday at MAC. It's called PWR, Parkinson's Wellness Recovery. You have to send trainers off to be certified in a 2-day course for it. We've done that with MAC. There's dance for PD that we had for a while, and the interest kind of tapered off when a couple of couples moved away, but that may come back. This rock steady boxing is the latest thing out there, which is possibly Main Street Gym is looking at doing something like that, which is very good. So there are a number of things. We've also set up, believe it or not, ping pong, as most people know it, table tennis, is considered one of the best sports for people with Parkinson's, as long as it's not too advanced from a balance standpoint.
Right.
Because it makes you move so many muscles in so many directions, and it also helps with your reaction time and your hand-eye coordination, so that because you have to watch the ball and try and figure out the spin and the speed and plan strategy, so it works the brain as well as the body.
Right. They say the same for Alzheimer's too,
Yeah.
those kind of activities.
So, and we've started a little table tennis club with 6 tables down at Crown Sports 2 nights a week. So
Very good.
we're doing what we can to provide exercise out there, and we're looking at other areas, like maybe trying to help people with transportation and things like that. So we provide some services. We're not just taking funds, we're using funds locally to improve things.
Well, I know the exercise we wanted to emphasize, and I know the educational programs I've done on Parkinson's very much emphasize the importance of exercise. That's like 40% of the plan. I mean, medications are a big part to keep the symptoms at bay as best you can, but the exercise is very important.
Yeah, it's really gained in the attention it's been given, because it's the closest thing to a neuroprotective treatment that you can get, since there's no drug that can slow down the progression, or surgical intervention, but exercise, I think, might be able to slow the progression.
Well, there are some developments with deep brain stimulation. I mean, that can be quite effective, but that addresses strictly the motor symptoms.
That's correct.
And you have to go across the bridge for that procedure.
You do. It's a surgical intervention through the skull, and there are kind of two ways to do it. One is the DBS, deep brain stimulation, which is actually placing electrodes in the specific spots in the brain using an MRI procedure to help guide it. The other is the MRI laser focused treatment, which actually uses ultrasound and shoots the ultrasound through to that same spot and kind of torches that little spot. That's not reversible. The DBS, deep brain stimulation, is reversible. It's just like a heart pacemaker. If they find a drug or a cure in the future, you can take this out or turn it off. It's programmed externally. So it sounds scary, but it's not as scary as it sounds, and it's very flexible because it's adjustable as you move forward. And if they find medication, you haven't killed anything. You've got it back. You just wake it up by taking the electricity away from it.
Well, the good news is, you and I both know, because I think we both try to keep up with the literature and what's going on, is there's just a ton of research happening
That's
with
good
Parkinson's, partly because of various foundations, including the Michael J. Fox Foundation, that's really out there leading the way in terms of looking for a cure or a better treatment and so on. So a lot going on with Parkinson's.
And this year, the Parkinson's Disease Foundation and the National Parkinson's Foundation decided to merge. And next year, they'll become the Parkinson's Foundation, a single entity. So that's combining those two. It'll be quite a substantial foundation, which hopefully will dump even more funds into research, which is the focus of Michael J. Fox Foundation, as you know. But so that's pretty big news.
Now, I know you also wanted to mention that the new focus of this restructured organization will be, you said, care partners, exercise. You've already discussed some of the exercise. So the care partners and then just increasing awareness. And I know you wanted to talk about both those other items as well.
Yeah, increasing awareness means both making the public more aware of what Parkinson's is, what it does to you, and how you can recognize it. I remember when we were meeting early on one time at a restaurant, and as we left, one of our members that had Parkinson's had a problem with freezing, which happens when people make a transition a lot of times from, say, a tile floor to a carpeted floor. They get up to the edge and they'll freeze, or going through a doorway, they'll freeze. And that happened as we're trying to leave, and the people behind us had checked out and they wanted to get out the door, and they got pretty impatient with our friend. So if people understand what's causing that and they can't help it, perhaps you won't have those experiences. But people need to know what to look for in the way of symptoms from a loved one, so that they can get help for them as soon as possible. So that's part of awareness. And the other part is we want the public to be aware that we have an organization locally. It can help if you have a family member or a friend struggling with Parkinson's. We've got literature provided by these national foundations. We've got people that have come over. We've got a support group you can come to. We have 2 social functions a year, 4th of July picnic and a holiday celebration in December. So we provide a lot of things that it's difficult for people with Parkinson's to find otherwise.
Well, I've been to some of your meetings, and they're quite impressive in terms of the number of people that attend, how engaged they are, and wanting to share their experience, help other family members with some of the struggles, say a care partner might be having, when their loved one with Parkinson's isn't sleeping well. I mean, there's all kinds of daily issues that can be discussed and some problem solving that can take place. Yeah,
and we're aware of your time spent last summer at Johns Hopkins learning more about it, and the wonderful presentation you put together for the area hospitals.
Well, everyone needs to know more about it, including, nurses who oftentimes forget some of these subtleties of how important it is that you get your medicines on time. And, of course, one thing you want to plug is that Aware and Care Kit that patients can obtain.
From the National Parkinson's Foundation. Actually, it's free. We usually have a few that people can pick up for free when they come to our meetings. But it's a little black kit, like a medium-sized purse, and it has some literature materials in it and a card explaining certain medicines that you don't want the nurses or the doctors to inadvertently let the patient take. But you keep your meds in it. If you go to the hospital, take it with you so that they can see exactly what the doctors wrote on it. It's quite a helpful piece.
It is. I mean, all the information, you have a ton of information there, pamphlets and all, very, very good resources for patients. And of course, people can go online to the various websites. We'll post some of them at the end of the program.
Okay.
And of course, we'll post information about your group, the Lower Shore Parkinson's Group.
That's correct.
Where people can get in contact if they're interested in attending or getting more information. So about the care partners piece, what is your goal there?
Well, that's a very important focus for us. They have quite a bit to deal with. It's not easy taking care of someone as Parkinson's advances. They need help with buttons, with dressing, and so forth. And you can wear out a care partner. It happened with my parents. My father had Parkinson's disease, and my mother was not in the same health after treating him because of the burden. And it happens quite a bit. So we've focused, trying to focus more on the health care for the caretaker, or excuse me, not the caretaker, the caregiver, care partner. We're making that an important part. Every time we look at what we're doing, that's a part of it. Our meeting structure has changed a bit to what we call the 30-30-30 meeting, where you spend a half an hour as the full group and you might discuss industry changes, research, any topic that they wish to discuss. Then we'll divide into small groups of 6 or 8, 2 or 3 couples. They can talk about things that they want to talk about. And finally, we break the last half hour into 2 larger groups, one with caregivers only, and the other just the folks with Parkinson's. And they each have their own conversations that they need, because caretakers want to share ways to do things or problems they're having and dealing with their loved one and where to look for help, and don't necessarily want the loved one to overhear it. So that provides a good opportunity for them to talk among themselves. So.
Yeah, I found that to be a very important aspect of your meeting, is letting the caregivers sit together and
where would
talk
we
about
be
their
without
struggles.
caregivers?
Yeah. I know. Well, similar with Alzheimer's, where I do a lot of work. It's a disease that truly affects
the whole family.
The family,
yep.
Especially the spouse. So, quite a dedicated group you have there, though.
It is. It's a very good group.
Any final message you want to get through?
No, if you have someone, you have a loved one with Parkinson's, please go to our website or stop by one of our meetings, 3rd Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and we'd love to see you.
It's very conveniently located at the MAC
That's
Center.
correct, at MAC.
Well, thank you so much, Art, for being on the program. I think it's very important you get this word out, especially with all the changes going on, and it's all in the positive direction, I think.
Yep. Thank you, Mary. We appreciate your help.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Focus on Health here on PAC 14.